You said a word that takes me to the next topic that I wanted to ask you. Quantum transformation. Explain that.
Quantum transformation for me is the way to look at your life being not the victim. It's literally, how can I go into my body and heal? And the words we use are part of that quantum transformation. I don't ever say I'm sick. I'm not sick. My body's detoxing something. I am in action. I'm taking responsibility. I am allowing this to detox. I am not pouring the words, I am sick. I am is the most powerful thing ever. So quantum transformation is a vocabulary. Money is inherently good. I think that it's very fascinating. Like, you have to pay to be alive. In the world that we've created, we are earth people. We are cells, we are neurons, we are some part of the blood cells, whatever we are on this living Mother Earth. When you really zoom out and look at those bigger questions, it's a journey of connection to yourself and to nature. From the time I could remember, I was like always pointing out the things that just didn't align, just didn't make sense.
Welcome to Compassiviste Dialogues. I'm your host, Ali Horiat. My goal in this program is to educate our audience about various global issues and on how we can help. Today, we have the fabulous Stefanie Trager. I've met her recently, and I'm intrigued by her work, her presence, her mission, and her history, which we'll get into. She's a speaker, author, futurist, business visionary, transformational coach, and medicine woman. She bridges ancient intelligence with modern wisdom to activate human potential. Very much aligned to the Compassiviste model. And believe it or not, I've never spoken with Stefanie when I put Compassiviste together, and I realized the activating of the human potential has to be part of the movement. Stefanie used to be a practicing attorney with a background in human rights, environmental justice, and corporate litigation. And she weaves multidimensional expertise in support of evolutionary change in individuals, organizations, and our world. And again, tying her to Compassiviste, so our listeners understand why she's such a foundational existence to what I'm trying to do, and brings me so much hope, because I realize there's so many people out there with almost identical mindsets, is that the evolutionary change we speak of here is that of the social evolution of a species more than the biological or say physical evolution. So we may grow a sixth thumb because we need to, work our phones more often than not, and that may happen over the next 100 years. But that is a different kind of evolution than what Stefanie's talking about. So here we go. Welcome to the show, Stefanie. Thank you for being here.
Thank you, Ali.
And let us start with an introduction from yourself. So we know you were a lawyer. We know I know a little bit about the background, but I want people to learn from you. Let's do from your earliest childhood memories that right now you can tap into and say, those affect me, those were important for me, to please tell us a little bit about the brushes with death and life in jungle and travels and a little bit of that. So it brings some context to your experiences outside of the courtroom, outside of the business world, and all the way to here now today. You sitting here, who are you? So floor is yours, and say as much as you want here.
Thank you, Ali. It's really great to be in this conversation with you again. I laughed when you did the intro and you said environmental justice, human rights, and corporate litigation. And I laughed because just hearing the somewhat of an oxymoron, somewhat of a hypocrisy and embedded in the dualistic, elements you right there. And when you asked the question of an earliest memory, I think of myself as a really young child wanting to make, like, there was nothing that made sense to me. Everything seemed like, was very, very young. You said that, but it's that way. Like always pointing out the things that just didn't align, just didn't make sense. And so from the time I could remember, I was didn't know the word for it, but I was seeing hypocrisy or the oxymoron or that confusion, and that confusion is what really led me on this path since I was a kid. And it's been many decades. Whatever this path is, we'll unwind that. But you mentioned death. From the earliest time that I can recall, I was 17 months old and had a accident where I died. I burned my feet with hot water and in a bathtub, and I died and spent months and months in hospital and had this whole, like, my lifetime of sort of these things coming to me that I had to really decode and understand. So I've had this relationship with death, with the other side, with our multidimensionality as humans, as souls existing here on Earth, and then the reality that I saw growing up, and my connection with nature. Our nature as souls, our nature here in this realm and in the other realm, the spirits and energies in nature, and trees and the forests, and yeah, and I've spent my entire life. I've spent isn't the right word, that sound word power. I've journeyed this whole life to really make meaning, as we all are. And how much of that meaning do we really get to lean into? What is our truth versus what is the narrative being fed?
And your life has a more exciting but similar trajectory to mine, in the sense that I see
Yeah.
parallels where I was in that, corporate city life, and I broke free from it. That's how I call it. I really broke free from the chains of it and from the addiction of it. Because for me, um, the aspect of money was an addiction.
Yeah.
That's what it was, and I broke free from it. And with you, you were able to leave all of that behind and kind of transition to what you're doing today. But um, in your case, you were more aligned to your values even throughout your working years. I mean, when you went into law, you weren't defending a rapist, for example, and trying to get them off of justice, for example, which, it's law. I mean, criminal law is still law. And I appreciate the fact that you should give people a fair trial. But then I also appreciate the fact that when a murderer stands there and says, yeah, I did it, that you go there and you try to get them off by some technicality or something. So, the ethical issues really, weighs heavy on me, but maybe not on the whole world. But for you, it was like that from the beginning. I mean, you didn't go into law because I want to make money or I want to become a partner at this big firm or anything like that. It was always with values, which took you through these travels, even during your, legal years, so to speak. Tell me a little bit about that, about how you defended nature through being a lawyer.
Mm. Yeah, well, this is really interesting. And this is the body of work, like this being like when I say this, I think of the word the phrase cognitive dissonance.
Mm.
This is the only way, and I'm a master at cognitive dissonance. We all are masters at cognitive dissonance, and my entire, like, right now, I'm body of work around decoding how do we step into the trap of cognitive dissonance. So I'll go into answer your question backwards. Cognitive dissonance being that the dissonance between what we know is good for us or right or aligned with our values and what we actually do, our behavior. And like how that is, like, there's this chronic collective cognitive dissonance on the planet. And the best way to decode and unfold that, which I know your mission around, cleaning up the environment, human rights, like the Compassiviste mission, it's, well, like, getting to the root of that is really understanding the mindset of humans, and like, how do we do, we see some facts and we're like, oh, I'm just going to do this thing anyway. Like, how come? Why? So that has been a mission of decoding the psyche for me, because I see how I fall to it as well. And it's like, if I do, then, like, how do we decode this? So when I graduated college, I was a little bit disconnected from myself. I went to school in Boston University, and it was like very city, and it was from New York to there. And I was like, this isn't who I am. But I had no model of what aligned to me at that point in my life. And so when I left, I moved to California. Just got this nudge going to California. So I can pack up, drive out west, saw nature, like really saw big trees, big sky, big land for the first time. And it changed me. viscerally changed me. It reminded me of who I am. And I saw the ancient redwood trees in California and literally heard them speak to me and remembered my time as a kid in the woods, talking to the trees, talking to the rocks, the boulder, the whole ceremonial space I had set up in my backyard, and like my family thought I was crazy. But here I see the trees and they've reminded me, like, oh, yes, you do hear what we're saying. We need your help. And I'm looking around at this ancient forest, like, you don't need my help. I need your help. And then I was pulling out of the parking lot of this beautiful place, this ancient redwood forest, and I saw a logging truck go by. I'm from New York. I didn't know what a logging truck was. And I saw one chunk of a tree, like the size that I was just talking to. And I followed it. And then I saw it like around what we would call the tree museum, which is these big, beautiful forests along the side of the road for tourists. But you go around the bend and there's all these clear-cut, bald, bleeding mountains. And I really understood what the assignment was and spent years as an activist and got into law because years as an activist working to protect those forests. And there was already a movement of people for a long time working to defend these ancient forests that were being like liquidated by a multinational company that sort of, anyway, it was a very interesting school. Like I graduated college and got to this place and it was a whole education of, ecology, literally the forest ecology, then my own spirituality, my spiritual connection to nature. We were working side by side and in solidarity with the local Yurok tribe and like the indigenous people there, the native people. And so it was a whole education and reconnection to myself as an earth person and spiritual practices. But one of the interesting pieces was in California, you could become a lawyer without going to law school. So we set up this law firm and it was also a law school. We registered with the state bar in California. I don't know listeners from all over, but the bar is the sort of the agency of sorts that regulates the admission to the bar. And so we set up this law school where there were 6 activists and 3 attorneys mentoring us, and we were studying law while we were suing this multinational corporation. A friend of mine was killed by a logger in the woods. And so that is what sparked this. And it was my commitment to him, like, I'm going to get justice. This is wrong. I'm going to get justice. And so we set out on the path. And so that's how I got into law, to answer your question. And after years of doing that, I realized there wasn't reciprocity. So in order to practice in any other state or anywhere else, I'd have to, I couldn't do that with that kind of license. And so I moved back to New York to be near my family and went to law school there. The whole other story, though. After years of activism, and 9/11 happened right when I got back to New York. I was in it. It was a whole thing. And so after a few years of human rights work after law school, I burned out and I took a job in corporate litigation. And so that's how I backed in. And it was like on one hand, an exhale, because no one says that about being in corporate law, but because I finally had some money to pay my bills and I finally had like just something to do. It wasn't fighting, fighting the system, which activism has its own thing. And so it was actually there among all of the things that I was exposed to, which were no longer hearsay. Like I was reading their emails. You know what I mean? I really just was able to step back and say, I don't want to fight. That fighting energy is a frequency. And that's not how we're going to create this new world. How do we stop the harm, create the new? And that was where I was. And it was also very tempering because I got to be around people doing awful things, but they were people. And before that, I was demonizing them. And so that's also not how we're going to succeed here, by making others wrong. It's understanding, who are you? What motivates you to be in this job, in this role, defending this horrific evil? It's just disconnection, but they're still human. And so that tempered me in a way. And I'll pause here because I know that I'm really interested to hear how like your path overlaps with this, but it was interesting because that's where cognitive dissonance knocked me on the head. But that's the second part of the story.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, well, that's the thing. I mean, the real overlap here is you and I both recognize that you're not going to progress and make change by just fighting the old. You need a new model. You need something that people can
Yeah.
switch to, right? And that's where I felt I couldn't find anything. So here I was thinking, okay, I can fight. Like you said, I can become an activist. I can do the roadblocks. I can do all those things. But the decades of all of this, how much has it given people an opportunity to switch over to something that works, that's functional, that brings in the values that I believe in? And I realize these models aren't out there yet. And so the force has to be to first create the new. It's kind of like, you know, this residential building is not working. It's old. It's going to topple down and whatever. There's we can go and fight the owner and say, hey, I'm not paying my rent unless you fix the walls and stuff, and continuously go to court and everything. One day the building falls on our head, during
Yeah.
this process. Or we can say we need to build a new building that we can all live in safely, right?
Yeah.
And in harmony
Yeah.
with the new model of it, that is a harmonious space, that's
Yeah.
sustainable, that has all the elements that we need to have in a now learning and having the education of what a new building should be. So to me, that was the analogy, right? And I said, I don't want to be part of the people who's sitting there fighting the landlord, when even if we win, we're stuck with the same old model that we just refurbish so long until it eventually falls on our head. And so, that was for me the point of, hey, this needs to change. Now, during, and something I recognize with a lot of people I speak with, not just on the show, but just in life, so much of old values, indigenous education specifically, comes into play with people who are changing. I come from a background where, um, and I call it fortunate. I was fortunate to grow up learning very much about Abrahamic religions, living it. So, I grew up in a family that was, my mom was very religious and my dad was spiritual, but not religious. So I kind of learned the
Mm.
difference between those.
Yeah.
Then I went to, boarding school, Catholic education. Then I went to university where almost all of my friends and everybody in that school department was Jewish, and most of them were Orthodox Jewish. So I fell into a world where, I started learning about kosher kitchen and non-kosher kitchen, something I never had heard about before. So then I started getting really into the education of, Judaism, so to speak. And I started realizing, all the, again, overlaps of
Yeah.
these original models, original spirituality models, not the business of religion, which separates them. But then being in Canada, I started interacting with Indigenous communities. And then I saw a whole different side. And during that time, because like yourself, I'm a martial artist, and I got to a level in martial arts where after the belts and everything, it becomes more philosophy. I mean, you're not showing that you've reached this level of education to go from brown to black, but then it's ethics and philosophy that gives you your um, higher statuses in martial arts. And so when I was in that level, Buddhism really took over because of a lot of the people around me and mentors and learning from there. So I got this, broad education from the old world, so to speak, the mantras of the old world. And when you speak of environmentalism, and it quickly attaches to indigenous values, when you speak of responsibility, leadership, the higher purpose, those are all values that live within their culture that we've butchered, so to speak, in North America more than anywhere else. Tell me a little bit how these things for you have brought on more purpose, or a better understanding of who you are and what you want to do. Because I find, again, in activism, we do a lot of this, like, the residential school massacre in Canada, for example, over all this entire time up until like almost 30 years ago, and it was like swept under the rug. And then we fight for it. There are lawyers who are out there fighting for it and fighting for justice. The Catholic Church played its role. They came and said sorry, and it was fake. But at the end of the day, that's one aspect of it. The higher aspect of it for me is there is a world of knowledge in there that we're not tapping into. And we're not tapping into it, obviously, because of the economic and political hierarchical powers that don't want this to grow. Because if this grows, it can become a a re-engagement of a movement, a re-engagement of a people. And, they worry, so they don't let that. But I want to hear from you how this has given you growth, so to speak.
Mm. Yeah, I mean, I think we are tapping in. Like there's movements now, where indigenous wisdom and like honoring First Nations is a real thing where it wasn't 30
Mm-hmm.
years ago, it wasn't. And it was blatant then if you saw it and I saw it. And I had a privilege. I didn't understand it. Like now you might back into something like a scenario where you're working for, human rights and the rights of indigenous people. And there's the UN Declaration on the Human Rights for Indigenous People. And, I focused heavily on that when I was in law school and like really learning the legal channels. But I bet I was 19 years old in the 90s and I, was fell in love with the trees. And so there was invited to participate in the local native, prayer circles. And we were there in common solidarity. And then I had done other activism and place called Ward Valley in Arizona. I think it was like the Nevada-Arizona border. The government was planning to bury spent plutonium rods on sacred land. And so I got to like live in this beautiful area for many months with the Navajo, like a bunch of Navajo nations who were fighting this and support in various ways. And so that was my introduction to, oh my gosh, like this resonates so much more with me. How they, just in generalizing terms, because it's not to pedestalize, but this is who I am too, and so it's led to a journey and many years doing environmental justice work where, there's narrative. I'm kind of bouncing around here, but there's narratives of appropriation, right? And that's a real thing. I also was a martial artist, did Afro-Brazilian martial arts for many years and African dance from Congo for over 20 years. And so just being in certain places, always bumping into this idea of this real thing called appropriation. And just also, so over the last decades, where I'm leading to here is over the last decades, watching how this division continues to play out in terms of appropriation, yours, mine, like you're takings, right? I mean, while this could be real, right? There's respect and right relationship and reciprocity and honoring and all of those things. And that exists in the polarity, but in the duality of like, you're right, our turn, you took, like this the victimization and the perpetrator. It's like the rescue perpetrator victim mentality. Like I am now, my mission is off that triangle. It's like the triangle of disempowerment. And I see how many narratives right now that we're looking at as restorative, regenerative, that actually operate on that triangle. And that's old matrix, that's old paradigm, that's going to continue to proliferate. Okay, so we're going to flip sides now, and so how do we move forward in right relationship and honoring? And we do need to stop the harm. So it might be fighting. Like, how do you fight in the matrix without being on that triangle, right? While also creating the new. I mean, this is the place where I think all the time. And like, what is the energy we have to hold to be in there fighting Chevron for justice for the indigenous people in Ecuador without it being like, without diving all the way into the dark side? It is a dark side. And it's easy to kind of get in there and step back and say, what is really going to solve the challenge, the problem right now, and create the responsibility. That's what I'm more interested in now. So just coming back to this piece around the indigenous wisdom, where I sit with this now is that invitation for us to honor, acknowledge the distinct horrors that a certain, in First Nations have endured while holding the wisdom, the truth, the connection as a reflection and a offering for the rest of us to remember. Instead of othering, it's yes, honoring and remembering. That's who I am too. That's who we all are.
Mm-hmm.
We're Earth people. And then once you go there, you realize, oh my gosh, they're holding wisdom of something even more ancient. So that's where I'm now. It's like, I want to really go back to the what is the truth of who we are and what are we really here to do on this planet as earthlings, cosmic beings? I hope I didn't lose credibility just now with that, but that's really where I'm contemplating right now.
You know what? I appreciate what you said because so I moved, growing up in being born in Dubai, growing up in Switzerland, moved to Canada for the first time to go to school, essentially, university, and ended up staying there for a little over 20 years. During this period of 20 years, I lived in Toronto, one of the most multicultural cities in the world,
Yeah.
and one of the most peaceful multicultural cities in the world. So there was a lot of bringing of cultures and education and histories together in that space, and it really taught me a lot. And July 4th in the US is July 1st in Canada. That's Canada Day, so to speak. And you know I remember everybody would write a piece about their thoughts of Canada Day, and they would mention some history of Canada Day. And one year I remembered, can I say we are part Indigenous because of being in Canada for so long and being kind of exposed to this culture in a sense, in the ways that I've changed? Because, like you said, I've become more at one with nature. I've become more educated about environment through there. It wasn't through the Catholic Church that I learned this. It wasn't through the mosque that I learned this. It was through this space that I learned it. And I learned more about endurance, forgiveness, respect from certain communities of indigenous people that I was really friends with. I would go over and be friends with, and so they taught me so much about inclusivity versus tolerance. That
Yeah.
was the first time I learned the difference, just in the word inclusive versus tolerance. And I learned tolerance has a shelf life because you're continuously taking on something that you're against. You're continuously accepting a negative. Eventually, you're just not going to accept that negative by the laws of nature. You cannot take them. But when you open the door to inclusivity, there's no more friction involved. So it's become this expansive space where everybody is allowed, so to speak, right, inside of you. And I can't tell you how many things I've learned from indigenous education, so to speak. And then I start thinking to myself, I carry this now with me. I've left Toronto. I'm carrying it with me. I'm writing about it. I'm using it in my life. I'm using it in this movement in Compassiviste. So at the end of the day, how much of this DNA, so to speak, the social DNA has, mixed into what I have been before and made me who I am today. And so I think if more people can learn that and understand that, they become more people like Stefanie, because it's that world that allowed you to kind of rise a lot more than what you would have been had you not been exposed to and learned and grown and grown yourself in that space. Am I right?
I think that, yeah, and I think the key piece is like it's about remembering who you really are, because that we are earth people. We are cells, we are neurons, we are some part of the blood cells, whatever we are on this living mother earth. We are earth people. And like in this cosmic galaxy, if we like really zoom out of like the,
We are
you
stardust,
know,
you know?
it's not even, and so I think like to really embody and to really like let that land in. For some people it doesn't land in, like we are stardust. It sounds good, but like how much does that like really come, what's the come from when we say that, right? For a lot of people it requires the connection first to really
Yes.
receive that and be like, yeah. Yeah, like so feel what that even means, like zooming out to we are floating in the galaxy. What is the truth of who we are, and what is the truth of this planet and its rotation in the solar system? That those are big questions. What is the truth about time? And when did it really start? And all of our stories and the origin stories. How come, say, an indigenous nation has a different origin story than, say, from your lineage and me from my lineage? And okay, well, then what is the truth? And so this is when you really zoom out and look at those bigger questions, it's a journey of connection to yourself and to nature, and then all the other fake false narratives and stories get to fall away. And I think that piece of when I was a child, and I remember like conjuring spirits, and I can see things, and I was very sensitive as a kid. Like when I'd go into a space and I'd be like, freak out, and my parents had no idea. And so I see kids now, if they freak out in a space,
Mm.
maybe they were picking up on an energy. They're
Hmm.
connected still. And that connection, when that's cut off as a child, it's like, well, we spent our whole life kind of seeking that connection again. And that connection is who we really are. And so I feel this beautiful draw to the indigenous wisdoms right now, and honoring the indigenous communities that have been holding the wisdom, the earth keepers, the and the struggles they've endured due to the entire, genocidal engine of this, whatever matrix. I think it's just a beautiful invitation for us to remember that we are all indigenous to this earth. We are
Hmm.
all earth people. Thank you, brothers and sisters, for holding this
Yes.
down while we had to come back to it.
Yes. And thank you for explaining it that way, because this was something that I couldn't explain as beautifully as you just did, but exactly what I'm trying to say, that we are really indigenous in that sense, right? But how do you explain to people? And as soon as you do, and as soon as you want to try to make sense of it for people who maybe don't have the capacity to appreciate or understand what you just said, they'll say, oh, appropriation. But it's not. It's really not. It's the opposite of that.
Yeah.
And you're absolutely right. I mean, the connection plays an important role. I really believe that if we can listen to the universe, that we're given the tools, we're given everything to be the momentum that we're meant to be in a lifetime that we are as we are at that moment. And it took me years, some decades, to understand that myself. I remember I stumbled into my master's of philosophy because I was going to come back home and basically work for my dad. And I didn't want to because I didn't like it. And so one of my professors said, hey, do you want to do a master's in philosophy? And I said, why? And he's like, because I'm writing a book that you may really be helpful with your cultural knowledge. And I said,
Mm,
okay, it's a good way to escape my dad, because I could have told my dad, hey, dad, I'm doing a master's. He'd be like, oh, great, son, sure, why not? Right? That was an escape for me.
yeah.
But the purpose wasn't the education, the purpose was the escape at first. When my professor turned to me and said, okay, you're you know about Sufism, right? And I was looking at him like, no, but I didn't say no. And I said, yeah, because I had this shame of saying, no, I know nothing about it. And so he said, you know what? I think there's a big connection between Spinoza and Sufism, and I want to bridge that and write a book about that, an academic book. And I think you do really well bringing in the research. And I was thinking, who is Spinoza, right? And nothing about those two worlds. That 2 years that I was working with him and doing my master's, and my research paper being essentially the book, so to speak,
Mm,
taught me so much about the oneness of the universe. And it became the design of Compassiviste Octopus, in the sense that we
mm,
are all together, that octopus,
mhm,
functioning as one ecosystem, as an organism on a grander scale, right? And then Sufism became very kind of aligned to um, shamanism, in a sense, with their take of responsibility in the world. And so when I saw all these ancient wisdoms that are um, not the status quo, because, like you said, they don't want this to come out, in a sense, in that breadth. Like, you go to Islam, and in most circles of Islam, it's like, oh, Sufism is some black magic stuff.
yeah.
There's no space to allow it to happen. And that same understanding is available in Judaism too. Judaism has,
Kabbalah. Yeah.
yeah, it has that as well, but it's looked at as this devil worshipping version to the ultra orthodox, right? They look
Yeah.
at it and they're like, right. So, but then you learn it in that way, you get introduced in that way, so you get scared from the offset. You're like, oh, this is scary. But then if you allow yourself to take a step in and see what it's about, then you change your mind. The logic changes. And a lot
Yeah.
of this comes together the way you're talking about it. And you said a word that takes me to the next topic that I wanted to ask you: quantum transformation. Explain that, because you ended your last sentence with the word quantum in it.
Mm. Well, I am not a physicist. I will sort of disclaim in advance. I am excited that now more than ever, there has been an embrace of quantum mechanics and quantum. Some might say there is no such thing as quantum physics, but the other alternatives to the linear Newtonian physics and mechanistic reductionist approach to reality. Because my whole life, like I was saying, it's been this nonlinear, multidimensional, living in like multiple dimensions, and wanting to make sense of how do I fit this into who I am and where I belong? Because as humans, belonging is important, right? So the exploration of, I remember in college, actually in the 90s, early 90s, I read The Dancing Woolly Masters, the book on quantum physics, the first book I was introduced to on quantum physics, Gary Zukov. And I was like, oh my God, and then I was like, all right, let me try some mushrooms and see what happens. And then the power, what was it? The something Be Here Now book with I forgot. Oh my gosh, bad. But I was starting to explore while I was in college just the edges of my reality, this other reality that I always thought something was wrong with me. So like growing up in the 80s, 90s, 70s, 80s, 90s, like having this whole other reality where I again was not exposed to people, or I didn't know anything about it or how to even find out about it. Where now there's so much information available. If you're a spiritual kid, you can actually, you're not going to go through your life like thinking something's wrong with you, probably. There's less of a chance, let's say. And that was really how I grew up. I thought something was wrong with me because I would be seeing things that other people didn't see in other dimensions, let's just say. And I was so I was very drawn to the idea of quantum mechanics because it explained something that was less linear. It's not linear science, physics, right? So when I say quantum transformation, we also grew up thinking that transformation was this go to therapy, which I did for many years, and therapy has its place. But it was there's other ways. And now, of course, it's also mainstream, like mindset shifts. And I've created tons of programs on how to, quantum transformations, quantum mindset shifts, because it could happen very fast. Like we were told, it's like, as long as you've had trauma, I had a lot of trauma. I had this accident. I died when I was a kid. So I had this trauma in my body and, like lived a life of continuing to create these intense violent traumas. Like I was literally watched the plane crash into the building 4 blocks away in 9/11, and like the building fell on me, oh my gosh, how did I manifest that? So quantum transformation for me is a way to look at your life being not the victim, not the, when you step off that triangle of victim, perpetrator, rescuer, and really shift into, wow, like how quickly can I change my story? How quickly can I go in and literally, I mean, there's so many bodies of work around this, like, and people now it's easy to touch, right? Though it's literally, how can I go into my body and heal? And the words we use are part of that quantum transformation. I don't ever say I'm sick, right? I'm not sick. My body's detoxing something. So I'm detoxing. I am in action. I'm taking responsibility. I am allowing this to detox. I am not pouring the words, I am sick. I am is the most powerful thing ever. So quantum transformation is a vocabulary. It starts with this vocabulary. It's about visualization, quantum visualization, really stepping out of the linear. Linear is the logic of law. To find causation is linear. A plus B equals C. If not this and that, then not, then what is it? But for A and B, then C. Linear causation. And so quantum transformation allows you to step outside of the linear and shift things in the quantum.
And it is an expression as well, because you are expressing what you want to kind of put out there. When you use the right verbiage, when you use the right vocabulary, you're really trying to say, this is how I feel, this is where I am. So in the sense of the quantum physics of it, an object can be in two places at the same time. It's just which one do you choose it at? So
Yeah.
through expression, you're choosing where you want to be at, essentially. And if you can continuously be so in tune to choose the better, uh, then you continuously grow in that passage. And that makes you a little bit of a futurist to embrace and to move from there, doesn't it?
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I think we all have the capacity to tap into the future, right? There's just multiple timelines of possibilities in any given moment. And um, exploring the multiple dimensions, let's just say exploring the fourth dimension. Living in like this 3D world, right? And exploring the fourth dimension, fifth dimension, sixth, seventh, eighth, ninth dimensions. Like, what are these? And if you once you like really get into a study of the dimension, like the potential realities that exist in each dimension, we are just living in this linear time space reality here. And this is for somebody who's say agnostic or atheist or has no, I don't even know those words actually, so I might have used them wrong. But for somebody who might not believe, um, or let's not even say, because it's not about othering, right? It's like if someone is still sort of playing with what does it even mean to be multidimensional? What does this mean? It's like I was using this word before I could even feel what is the eighth dimension. So like went on this whole study, and there's lots to learn around. Look at the Mayan calendar and all kinds of ancient civilizations that were tapped into multiple dimensions, working with frequencies and working with energies, and that we're using such a limited bandwidth of our capacity. And where the energy of futurism comes in for me is I think of the forest in 1996 when I arrived there. And I think of the years of being an activist and speaking into the future, where nobody was like the word sustainability, the word regenerative agriculture. Like, it's been interesting to watch the kind of taxonomy shift in the narratives shift and sort of get watered down as well as they mainstream. And we could just watch the human psyche, how we expand into this heart-centered, version of humanity, where I look at it like, and I actually have this body of work. It's like a modality when I'm working with people, and it is really about shifting our identities, because most people will not say, "Oh, I want to be a futurist," or "I want to be a quantum creator." Like, what even is that? But what we do know is I don't feel a sense of belonging. I'm shifting, something's changing. I don't know who I am now. I have to wear all these hats. I have to be someone when I'm around my family. I have to be someone else in order to fit in here, to get the job, to whatever it is, right? To get the clients. And we go through these identity shifts, and especially as we expand and awaken and remember who we really are, what we really are here to do, then we bump up against these edges of our identity. I went through this intensely when I was like, okay, I kept my law license for a long time, still have it actually, but it was very tied to an identity.
Hmm.
Um, for a long time. It's no longer is, though we go through these identities. So how do you shift that? When I look at the identity, I look at the program. What are all the programs? And we're programmed creators. When we're creating in this kind of matrix, this narrative, this collective paradigm that we're colluding with, that is creating, that is unsustainable, let's just say, we're programmed creators. And when we step outside of that, we're like, want more purpose. So we're, say, like you relinquish all of your belongings and you go off and you lean into purpose. And then you touch into your heart and you connect with these indigenous communities. You're like, yes, this aligns. Your heart comes online. And we vow to be on purpose forever. And we like commit to this purpose. And now we're heart-centered creators. And I feel like that's where most people are now. We're leaning towards now, which is
Hmm.
great. It's the breaking out of the old identity, collectively and individually. So there's this individual process, which leads to the collective.
Hmm.
And so the future is higher purpose. It's beyond this, what is my purpose? It's this higher purpose. It's a frequency. And it's like being liberated, because
Hmm.
eventually the purpose becomes an identity too. You need a brand. You
Yes.
need a
Yes.
message, right? And so then we lean into this place of higher purpose. And when we're in that really, really in that place, not from ego or anything else, but like really in that place, that is where we tap into quantum creation, creating with like this multidimensional, tapped into the multidimensional possibilities of creation. And I feel that is the future. And so that is my guidepost for when I see certain new technologies or mindsets or indoctrinations. Do they align with that higher purpose, that frequency? Do they align with that potential? And that's how I kind of discern, not in line with that. I'm going to continue to hold the space for this. I don't remember your question, but did that answer it?
Yes, no, it did. It did answer. I asked you about being a futurist, and you answered that perfectly for myself. I'm sitting here silently listening to you speak when you answer questions, and I can't help but to automatically just reflect into my own gradual change in that
Yeah.
way that you describe. And it's as if you flow through me when you're speaking, in a sense, because I remember when I had my fund. Okay. um, when you have a private fund, it's not like a public space or a bank where just random client walks in and puts money into a program or something. It's really relationships. And
Yeah.
so I had a potential client who was a racing lover, right? So I
An
had to
investor,
go out, yeah, an investor who
client
was
being
going to,
investor.
yeah, it was going to be a client of mine, and I knew the way to get this client to invest, a big portfolio with me was to kind of tap into the love of cars and racing. And so
Mm-hmm.
I became, for a little while, this racing aficionado. Like, I loved it. I'm on every race course. I'm on the track. I'm doing lap times, and we went racing together, me and him, and he started falling in love with me as not me, but that person that I had created for that moment. Two
Yeah.
months later, I'm chasing another client. This guy loves sailing. I know nothing about sailing. I have to
How
learn.
fun though.
Yeah, it is fun. But at the same time, you know what happens? After a few years of this, you wake up one day and you look yourself in the mirror and you say, do I love racing, or like, who am I?
Who am I?
And
Yes.
and what is happening here? Oh, everything
Mm,
Ali is the dollar sign at the end of the day, because essentially Ali shapeshifts to the higher dollar. So the
mm,
higher purpose of Ali was the higher dollar, nothing more, nothing less, absolutely
wow.
nothing else. And
Yeah.
so I call that, in my capacity at the moment to break free from it, an addiction. Why? Because in my world of finance, and that kind of cutthroat finance world, um, it became, of day trading and stuff. It became, I saw so many people with so many vices, and I didn't
Yeah.
have those. I was lucky enough that I had this balanced self, in a sense. So
Mhm.
no drugs, no alcoholism, none of this stuff to kind of take off the edge, right?
Mm,
But I had to help friends of mine go to rehab and see them detox over, like, when you talked about detox, see them heal over those few days. That is the roughest time of going through, a drug addiction rehab program. And I realized I need to heal. I need to detox. I need to let go of all of this that I'm carrying around,
mhm.
and find who I am. And that find who I am kind of gave me the higher purpose, and it gave me
Yeah.
this understanding of the multidimensional, as you speak, right? I'm here
Mm,
living in that three-dimensional linear space that essentially says, make more money, make the Forbes list.
yeah.
And then I started thinking to myself, okay, let's just look into the future. It's 5 years later, I'm there. What have I achieved? What have I done? What is the legacy? What is the purpose? What is the flow of all of this? On what frequency does any of this happen for me? And it didn't bring any value. And when it
Mm,
didn't bring any value, that's when I realized I'm on the wrong path. Like, this was not my life. This was a version of my life that possibly, in some dimension, in some universe today, in one of those gazillions of possibilities today, like quantum. That's when I got intrigued in quantum mechanics, because I said, if we can take a picture, just pure quantum physics, and show, an item in two spaces at the same time and select which one we want to call truth, then there must be a version of me that is right now somewhere in the Bill Gates world, financially speaking, somewhere in the world. But
Mm.
it doesn't have to be this conscious version of me that I am now. This conscious version of me that I am now has to struggle past these points to reach that purposeful space that I want to remember I'm reaching a higher purpose that I
Why do you
have.
need to struggle?
For me, the struggle was walking away from the
Mm,
money,
mm,
right?
mm,
The origin of
mm,
it. I mean, not
yeah.
anymore. Now I'm
Mm.
elated beyond, like, I cannot explain to people how happy I really am. Whereas back then, happiness was, again, I explained to people the difference between, the linearity of it that you say, and I use almost the same language. I use linear a lot because I said, it was like this: stress, 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 make $1 million, go out, blow a little bit, save a little bit. And that blowing a little bit over a small period of time, travel, shopping, whatever it may be, the fun that it brought was just that momentary happiness that became a diminishing type of happiness later on as well. Because how many cars are you going to buy? It's like,
So let me ask you a question.
yeah,
Now that you are who you are, I'm not asking, would you change anything, right? I'm not asking you that, but though, if you had the resource, like maybe you do, I don't know, though, given the resources that you had access to before and who you are now, how would you hold that energy? It's so different. Like, you might still go shopping, but you're not doing it to fill
right.
yourself.
No, but see, the difference now is, let me give you a very, honest personal answer. I have not bought myself an item of clothing in probably easily 4 years.
Yeah.
But the purpose I went shopping was not because I needed a new shirt for an
Yeah.
event. No, it was because that was part of the disease. That was part
Mhm.
of the problem. I had to do that to offset some kind of emptiness in my world.
Mm.
So at the earliest stage of me realizing that, you know, um, it's Wednesday afternoon, I have nothing to do. What do I do? Oh, let's go to Gucci. That was a sad experience.
Mm.
And to get fulfillment from the salespeople who knew, oh, money just walked in through the door because they're going to make big sales now. And that was your relationship. That was your fun
Yeah.
space. That was a sad experience. There was no reality to it. There was no connection with it. There was nothing. So if I need a shirt now, let's say I'm getting up from here, my shirt, I don't know, grabs onto something and it rips. I'll go buy another shirt. And I'm fine with that because
Yes.
I need another shirt, I'll buy another shirt. But to have to get up after finishing this conversation, I have to get up and say, oh, I'm so bored, or what do I do? I'm on edge. What do I do? I'm going to go to the mall and I'm going to shop. There was no purpose for
Right.
this
So
transformation.
if you had the
Right.
resources now, right, like the philanthropy, the impact investing possibility, right, like the ways
Right.
that you now know that you would deploy that
Mhm.
capital, like doesn't mean you'd go buy a shirt unless you
No.
rep the shirt,
Yeah.
right? So it's an interesting. Your journey is very interesting because you had to let go, and because I do a lot of work. A lot of my clients are like high net wealth, and it's like this and impact investors, philanthropists, and really exploring these inner questions around how do you
Mhm.
fill that gap. And just because you're wealthy doesn't mean that you connected to who you really are and what you're here
Yes.
to do. And then it's also a huge responsibility, say, for
Mhm.
inheritors or someone who has an IPO and all of a sudden there's a wealth event. And it's like, well, whoa, it's a whole interesting psychology, like field of psychology. And so I wanted to ask you, like, if you had like access to what you had before now, and again, I don't know, maybe you do, but if you did, what would be like your first, what would you do
let's
first?
let's let's assume I don't, right? And let me tell
Let's
you
assume
what
you
I
do.
would do. What I would do first is I would begin the mission that I believe is my purpose today. That
Yes.
is what I would do first. So the first thing I would do, and Compassiviste has come almost full circle to the point where the theoretical building blocks are done. We're at a
Yeah.
stage where it's at the physical, which means,
Mhm.
we've transitioned from ideation to now we start here, and we start the actual building blocks, the physical building blocks. And for me, it starts with the collective. it starts with this, raising there are a lot of, Stefanie, there's so many people like yourself, like myself, who are speaking in such aligned terms and mentalities and mindsets that we don't even know each other. We don't know of each other. We fall upon each other because somehow in this digital unified world we get to meet, right? Just like I met you. But there's just so many millions of others who we don't know of. There's somebody just like you in Germany somewhere. There's somebody just like you in Buenos Aires somewhere. But maybe not identical, but similar enough that it creates an octopus effect. It creates that oneness that that we can feel the wholeness of each other. And I think the first thing I would do is to put out the first steps of Compassivistes movement so that these people can come together. And that was, I've explained this to you, that was the convention. There is no convention in the world today, a compassion convention, that brings everybody together and says, all the people who feel like Stefanie does, all the people who think they're at that place, whether they need to transition to the understanding of what you're teaching and coaching essentially, or whether they are already there and they themselves are also coaching and being leaders of tomorrow, right? Wherever we are in this place, we come together. That tapping into that oneness creates an energy that I think will obliterate the problem. Because is, that's what I'm trying to do. Exactly. Yeah. So that's what I mean. Today, I feel like, but having said that, someone once asked me, why did you give away $100 million? Like, you're stupid. You should have kept that and done this. And I said, had I kept that, I would have never been this.
Yeah.
That was the thing. I had to grow. And growing has this shedding aspect to it, just like a reptile. You kind of have to grow out of certain skins. And I had to grow out of that skin of living within that dimension. And to do that, part of, someone called it a sacrifice, but let's just say, part of that sacrifice to grow was to shed that skin for me. And it was very important that I do for me specifically. Yeah. And it may not have been for many people. There are so many people, and I see this every day. I mean, there are people around the world who come into money, whether it's a huge divorce settlement, inheritance settlement, or IPO, like you said, and all of a sudden they're in $1 billion, right? Yeah. And you see that it does not destroy their lives because they're more aligned to themselves and their higher purpose, and they're using that money perfectly or very well. Yeah. So, right? But Ali was not there. Ali was lost, right? I was that Ali, that guy was lost. So, everything to him was essentially what you see on social media, like, let me show you how much money I have. Let me show you this, So that was the existence because it just grew in that capacity. So there was never going to be a time where I was sane enough to be able to make that transition without going through rehab. And my rehab was essentially a few years of homelessness and, kind of experiencing things that brought me to the understanding that I am today. And I wouldn't change a day of it, even through the violence. I mean, again, overlap. You saw your friend, or you experienced your friend getting killed by a logger. You were chased by a bear. There were different times that you could have died along that process. There were times, I was in Iraq, I was in Turkey, I was in Egypt. I was in Egypt during the revolution. I was in a mob of people running when they were getting shot at. I could have been shot. Somebody did get shot. I was in Iraq, again, surprisingly. I had nothing to do with this, but I was there during some of the upheavals and stuff. And again, running on a street because out of nowhere, some craziness happened and people started shooting at each other, and I could have died there too. I've had brushes like that during this period really gave me insight and other beautiful experience with people and communities and again, old world spaces. Right, I was in Ecuador for a while. That was the beginning of my journey. When I left Canada, I really wanted to break free. And I went to the airport. I'm like, I'm going to do this. I'm going to do this. I'm going to do this the whole way to the airport. I'm going to do this. I get to the airport. I look at the departures list and all the flights are leaving late night. There's one flight going to Quito, Ecuador. And it was 2 hours away. I was like, ugh, I don't want to go to Ecuador. I'd rather go to like Turks. And it's like, there are no flights. And I knew if I didn't take that flight out, I would chicken out. I wouldn't wait the 9 hours. I would chicken out and I'd go back home and I'd go to work the next day. So I took that flight. I got there, and the nature that I got to experience was the first moving experience for me that said, wow, like I didn't do this all this time. I had all this wealth. Like I never did this. I went to
Mm.
dinners at the Eiffel Tower repeatedly instead of this. Like that's just, oh my God, what am I doing? And days there gave me this, return to my natural self, return to my earthly self, like you say. And that was the beginning of the experience. So I'm kind of like following you as you lead this conversation and saying all these things. I was like, yes, I went through that. Yes, I did do that. Yes, I believe what you're saying. I understand you fully. And now I want to ask you something, because I know I myself as an audience, and a lot of people ask this, the discussion about multidimensional and multi-universe and the quantum mechanics of all of this is theoretically very well spoken about. And you do an amazing job presenting the theoretical version. Give me a short, real experience. So tell me a moment where you're in this dimension, you're here, you're changing, you're making that transition. You can choose in the quantum world through an actual experience, not theory. So
Yeah.
that people, and I know this is probably what you do in your work, right? But I want people to get a glimpse of, this is what happens when, whether you're working with Stefanie or whoever, but this is what happens. This is what Stefanie's talking about when she speaks theory. And a lot of people will be like, I don't even understand what she's saying. Because when you're not at a level to have experienced this, or to be in a zone that you can kind of appreciate what you're saying, it becomes, French to a person who doesn't speak French.
Yeah. The first element is trust and believe, right? Like knowing yourself and trusting your experience, because, oh, I had a dream, or, oh, I had it was just a thought or some synchronicity, right? It's those things we experience that we allow ourselves to go a little bit deeper into. So for me, you just mentioned Ecuador, so I'll just share this really quickly. In 2012, when the story of my time in corporate litigation in Midtown Manhattan, which was literally multidimensional, going on the subway every day from Brooklyn to Midtown. And there was a period of time where I can see energies in the form of souls that have left this physical plane and are stuck, and places in New York City that felt like I just couldn't go to certain places because I could see that's where a lot of these spirits, souls were. And so I just, in honoring that, don't want to go into too much detail, but that was a very hard time for me because it was everywhere. It was very up for me. Death was stalking me. And so one dimension is death. What happens to the soul after? And can we communicate? And well, that is my experience as a communicator with the other side, since I was very young, but not really understanding it. So it began to be a very uncomfortable experience while living in New York City. And I had to leave New York to actually really digest and metabolize this channel that had come online, this channel, this dimension I could tap into that came online. And so I'm working in Midtown Manhattan. It was everything was very difficult in this time. And when you don't listen to the whispers, you become screams. So this was, I was put on a case. It was quite horrific and I couldn't do it. I was like, no, it was a pharmaceutical case, negligently administering trials overseas, bad things happening. I'm not doing this. Left the office, went to a yoga retreat, saw a friend from my forest activism days in California. She's introducing me as a forest defender. I'm like, oh my God, I'm a sellout. Like this whole thing while I'm observing myself and this all happening. And I experienced a car accident, which led to a 2.5-year concussion. And I got back to the city and I found a neurologist and they prescribed me that drug of that. So Being able
Wow.
to, in the moment, feeling all the feels in the moment, being able to see the connections, right? This isn't just like synchronicity. This is an example of how there is, like, in the fourth dimensional realm of the collective mind, like all possibilities are playing out. And if you can actually see the patterns and the energetics, the energetic energy is not literal, A plus B equals C. Unless you are actually a masterful at working with the energetics, then it actually becomes quite literal, linear. But in the energetics, to really see how the pattern is playing out. And so I couldn't leave, I couldn't function for 2.5 years. But I finally, long story, left New York City, moved to Oregon, I go to Ecuador, put my stuff down, I go to Ecuador. And
Wow.
I was ready to end my life. I was really, it was in so much pain. It was very hard to be in the physical body. And I go to Ecuador, and we end up in this place in the Amazon. I did not go here for this. And I went as an herbalist. I was studying with different herbalists, and we get this invitation to go into this village in the Amazon. So we arrive, and then we entered. It was like a mythical vortex. This place was so ancient where we were. And the medicine man who greets us is like, I'm sorry, I can't sit and teach you. He was going to bring us to the garden and teach us about plants. And we weren't going for like a shamanic experience. Like, we were going as herbalists. Well, I have sick people in my village and I have to do a ceremony, and he invites us to sit around the periphery of the hut, the healing hut. And in the middle of the night, I didn't tell him about no, he didn't know about the concussion, but he ends up coming over to me in the middle of the night and, like, a few times, and doing all of this work. And he was extracting something, I find out after, but so this is another dimension where he can see something else going on, right? And it was healed after 2.5 years. Like, I finally received that healing there. But this place where we were was the largest copper reserve in the equatorial belt, like that whole area of the latitude of of the Amazon, and then you go into the Congo, the equatorial belt. So this area, he comes to me for 4 years in my dream. 4 years. He's alive. For 4 years in my dream, telling me that he was working with the frequency of the copper and the cosmos, and like this cosmic energy. And so for 4 years, I'm taking notebooks and notes about how he was explaining these dimensions. That's how I really started in 2012 to think about it. I didn't really understand it, like embody it and get it. And I still don't, but I've been like trying to decode this. I've been decoding this since then. And, that place is now a copper mine. And they were removed, they're forcibly removed. So, this is that connection to the activist. This is the connection to the future is frequencies, like frequency of, and then it played out again. I was in Ecuador in 2018 doing research for a book that I was writing. And it was, this time I was in a place that was all open, just recently open to oil. And I had an experience where saw this big ancient tree, like a big kapok tree, and had this whole experience where she spoke to me and told me about how the frequency of the oil is working with the living system there. And so, like, there's all this information. So when I don't know if that answers your question, though. It's, whoa, she's nuts, or whoa, that's a perceptual expansion right there. Like, can we perceive that there's so much more happening in the invisible?
I'm so far past the point of, oh, she's insane, because I feel like, you know why? Because I feel like there are people who are so, narrow-minded, in the sense
Yes.
of, and a lot of it is not their fault. They're just tied into the system so badly, Um, I have friends who I don't blame at all, because it's like they go to work at such obscene hours, 2 jobs, and they're trying to raise kids, and then they have a dog, and all these things are happening at that level that does not allow, the growth, essentially, because you're just so busy trying to make the payment from 3 months ago, that if you
Yeah.
don't, it crashes your world down. Your arrears are
Yeah.
your thoughts. You're not even at a place where you're like, oh, this month's mortgage. No, you're at default. You're at a space of eviction. And these things are happening in their lives, that the economy just keeps them boggled, right? It keeps them too busy. And
I'd say us. I would say us, I wouldn't even other because I experienced that too. I'm physically in this world and
We're all
it's
physically in this world.
right. It's a constant work.
Yes.
It's like, how can I can experience that. And I'm also living here in this world and have,
And this is
in these
exactly
energies. Yeah.
the question I'm coming to. I started saying, they can't because they're just tied down into this. And then I started thinking, well, I couldn't. And I tried to make that change, and other
Yeah.
people can try to make that change. But the thing is, to be honest and to be fair, um, I'm one person who has no responsibilities in that sense. And I'm able to make those transitions because the weight that I carry with me is so light. It's Ali and a carry on. That's it. But there's nothing to move with me. But now you're trying to move and experience this shift and become the new higher purpose of yourself with a whole community of family, extended family, and a lot of other attachments to your
Yeah.
life. And it becomes so difficult. So that's where I started saying, don't blame, don't say them. Don't do it like you did something special and you're so advanced and you're seeing the world in a different way and they cannot. No, it's not that.
Yeah.
There's just so much that we need to help each other to
Yes.
rise through that, right? So then that's kind of where Compassiviste came from as well, in the sense of just because it's kind of like, you're naturally given all these advantages to reach the 100-meter line faster than someone else, just by the nature of the genetics of the composition. So don't look at the other person and say, you're not trying as hard, because their hardest may never be your natural normal in that space, right? So how do we make everything, in a sense, equitable so that there is no them, so that we can kind of embrace and invite everybody and say, it's okay, we can all do this together, we can all rise together? Because I think that is the aha moment of our universe now, because there are a lot of people like yourself who are mastering this. There are a lot of people like myself who are trying to learn what's going on, and trying to bring this to the physical, in the sense of, how can I make people make that happy transition like I did, so that they, it can be this joyful life for them. And that is really the purpose. And so, taking aside um, all of the theory again, and all the glorification, and all of the us and them, and all this conversation, and speaking in this language where many of us are like-minded, many of us have what's called radical concepts, because, like you said, you say your story, and then you say, well, they might call me crazy, or they might say a perception, so you recognize that there is that space where somebody will call you crazy. So, radical concepts. And the problem of also this higher dimension and frequency, and understanding that there's more that ancient civilizations were dealing with, that we are just not even close to the capacity of being there right now, because we're so boggled down by our capitalism and GDP markers and things like that. And so the sustainability is gone. The idea
I want to jump in here. We are. I think that, remember what we were saying before, the vocabulary. I'm not sick. I am detoxing. I think we are there. Like, all of the things that exist that you're saying right now, I agree they exist. And can we speak into that while also holding the dimension where it is transformed, right? There is so much distortion in the field. People are disconnected, and we are awakening and remembering. And how do we do that? I think that's a big part of how I see the shift happening.
And that's the question.
Yeah.
That's the question I ask you. So I wanted to answer that. I wanted to tell me, how do you see your success in that mission? And through you, I'm not using you as one person, but I'm using you as a stream, right? If your stream can make this shift that you speak of, then we can embrace that on a global scale. We can embrace that on a scale to say, hey, this is how it was.
We are embracing it. We are embracing it on a global scale. And it's like one, we are. Like, if I am, then we are, and you are, we are. And so how do we spread the wave is the question, right? And I think it's like you said, uh, as I was speaking before, you were feeling it through you. You were seeing your experience through you. So for me, speaking and being in rooms and facilitating groups and being, speaking to people and sharing the transmission of that so that they can remember too. Right. It's, for some people, like my, my sister, for example, she's like, I have no idea what you're talking about. It's like, it's okay. On some level in your DNA, you do, but it's okay. And so we don't have to wake everyone up. We don't have to do that. That's not right. If our role is to be the frequency of it first and really take responsibility for where I'm not. Like, yesterday I was having a rough day and I was not the frequency. I was not the frequency, So it's like, I'm not going to fake it. I was just not. So I'm going to do what I need to do to come right, and owning that. And, you know, where does war live in me? Where does this thing live in me that I am othering or saying is wrong? Until I could fully clean it up in myself, then I cannot continue to point and point and point, right? And it's this continuing to discern and being mindful in myself, how can I continue to be this vessel but at the same time that we live in a very interesting time. The Mother Earth, this Earth that we are Earth, is evolving. She's evolving. Like, we're evolving, but she's evolving too. So there's energies that are evolving. There's energies from the cosmic realms, like the sky, the solar system, and literally and scientifically, like geomagnetic storms and solar flares and cosmic events. The moon moves the ocean. It governs fertility in women. Like, to think we are not affected by the cosmos it's not some cosmic, woo-woo. It's astronomy.
I know,
right?
100%.
So, and I'm not like, I'm sharing because I know that, but I'm excited about it because I feel like when we can continue to hold that space and then say, okay, like, so there's just like white blood cells and red blood cells. Red blood cells sometimes, they're sort of on the self-destruct mission, or if we can look at people who are not necessarily connected and they've forgotten or lost their connection to their nature, their true nature, it's where does that live in me? And so I think I'm very much around this, this another body of work called the inner work of impact. It's really all of the things we see outside of ourselves that we want to change. Where does it live in me still? And when I can start to see the world as perfect and beautiful, and everything is a reflection of of the reality that I'm creating or colluding with, then I can actually literally change the world. We will have so much more momentum collectively when we are all doing that and recognizing that we're creating this reality. So how we speak about it, how we speak about what we don't want even is really important. Yeah.
What you just said leads into a question that I want to ask. But before I ask that question, I want to identify in your language the word economy so that we can lead into the next one. Because you believe in a socioeconomic order, let's just call it that way, of reciprocity and social and environmental justice. And this is something, it holds your body of work in law and your activism and yourself and your growth and, where you are even today. You hold that as this is the world, so to speak, that you believe in that socioeconomic order, so to speak. Is this correct to say that is how you define economy? Not the word economy, but how do you define the economy that you think should be?
Oh, I'm working this out. Actually, I have a landscaper outside who might start working soon, making noise. But so
It's okay.
I think about this a lot because I see a lot of people right now. There's a collective energy of this intent to redefine capitalism, to redefine regenerative finance, regenerative capitalism, like gift economy, this, that. And I think there's a lot of like bad, and that's just part of the problem too. Like, that's part of the othering and probleming and duality, right? And I think that money is good. Money is inherently good. I think that it's very fascinating. Like, you have to pay to be alive. You have to pay to be alive in the world that we've created. And so when I think of the future of a world where that energy creates scarcity, creates competition, creates scarcity. Competition's healthy. Maybe that's natural. I do believe that we're here to experience all of this and
Hmm.
to create together. It's this one big creation of art. And
Yes.
it's like you collude with this painting that you like and you want to add strokes to it. And if you don't like it, but you're like colluding with it, then you can't be in the ideation of something new. So I appreciate your question. I think about it all the time. I don't know what the answer is. I don't know that we are right now the gift economy or yeah, I mean, I know that there's a lot of different models being played with, but
Hmm.
systemically, it's
Hmm.
it's not just about money. That's the thing, and exchange and trade. It's about megalithic constructs like insurance and
Hmm.
like these ideas that are so built on scarcity and fear that, until we deconstruct those paradigms, I feel like I don't even know that the beauty of what's possible can emerge.
Yes. And you know what? I'm happy you said insurance, because I think part of these things will self-destruct to allow the beauty to emerge. Because insurance, I mean, just this week, you go on any news feed, you're like, there was like 20 different floods around the world, right? How many times is insurance going to pay out a whole island's destruction? With what money eventually, right? When you have the whole city of New York flattened by some tsunami, what insurance company is going to be able to pay that out, so to speak, right?
Yeah.
Eventually, these systems topple because they just can't. They can't stay alive. They're built on a model that didn't take into account this much accident or this much
Yep.
damage. They're built on models that are like, hey, out of 200 people who are paying us $100 a month in insurance, one is going to have an accident. It's a good model. Let's do this, right? But
Yeah.
if on day one insurance companies came and said, well, the statistics are out of 200 people who give us insurance money for their car, 190 of them crash. Well, they're not going to start an insurance company because the model doesn't sustain an economic profit. But that is a part of it. The other part of it is, you're right. It's a transition, and again, through the arts, what Compassiviste is about, through expression, through the arts, through the collective, it's trying to play with these ideas and emotions of what can be, what beautiful future can be through the changes in a lot of things, and the way we eat, and the way we interact with our food, and the way we support our ecosystems. And here is the question that I was trying to lead into. You have a list of values on your website that you go by and you stand for and you defend. I want to focus on what we've spoken about a lot actually today, the multidimensional reality. And, this is something that you stand by. Explain to people what that means to you to be in a multidimensional reality. How that you wake up in the morning, how does that look like?
Well, thank you for asking that question. I think I was saying this before. It's the energy. It's living in the place where I am tapped into the energetics. I wake up and I'm like, how do I feel today? It's not just like, how do I feel in my body today in this physical thing? It's where's the moon? What's the weather? Not just what's the weather, because like, what do I wear today? It's how is that affecting my physical body? What's the energy feel or read of all the people around, and collectively. It's just tapping into the energetics of things. So I go walk my dog in the morning and I'm talking to the animals and the trees and just feeling how Earth is today. In my reality, it's like there's a lot of energies going on. It's feeling what happened when I was sleeping, where there are other energies here, visiting. And
Hmm.
then I sit down at my computer and it's like it's work, it's linear, it's emotional, it's all the things of being human in the 3D realm. And then it could be feeling my come from. What's my come from? If I want something to happen, is it coming from scarcity? Is it coming from lack? Is it coming from fear? Or do I need to close the computer, go sit at my altar and tap in? tap
Mm.
into my guides and my God zone,
Mhm.
and
Mhm.
get myself in the right place. So it's just this constant dance with remembering that it is easy to get sucked in. It is easy.
Mhm.
I speak to like that. This is my truth and how I live, and it is really easy to get sucked into the heavy, dense energies of the 3D world. So it's a dance. Constantly got to dance. If you want to choose to expand.
And I have one last question because I think this is where the audience can reach you. I really like the concept of the journey of increase.
Mm,
And this is something you do. And I feel like there's a healing element in there. And there's that element that you just ended your sentence with.
yeah.
And tell the audience how a little bit about that because I think if I had an advertising platform, that is definitely something I would have there because it's something that matters.
Mm. Thank you for asking about that. Yeah, this is kind of what I was mentioning before. The journey of increase is think about everything. We're always influencing our outcomes. We're always influencing everything in our environment by our energy, our words, our come from. You know how you say one thing, but you're coming from something another place inside. Like you're coming from anger, and you say, "I forgive you." That doesn't land, right? So it's really mastering the come from and mastering the vocabulary. I call this vocabulary of increase because, like I was saying before, we are already doing this. We have to speak it into being because words are like magic. Words,
Hmm.
where did they come from? At the etymology, it's interesting. Think about the currency of the water, the current of the water, currency, the banks of the river, the banks, the court. We play on a court, basketball, but we go to court to duke it out.
Mm.
It's all like this really interesting word game. And every word we speak, like good morning in English, this is in English, so biased for English,
Hmm.
like where we mourn for the loss of something. Good morning or grand rising, like really choosing words intentionally to create your reality. It has such potency. So the Journey of Increase is a 90-day program that I created to deprogram my own mind when I was going through something like early in 2015. And this just kind of came through a process and it has this journal. See if I have a journal around. There's a journal that you write in for 90 days.
Hmm.
And this process of working with the vocabulary of increase, a process of quantum visualization and mastering nonlinear perception, which is this multidimensionality, right? This nonlinear perception, because when we think linearly, like we're just tapped into if A doesn't plus B doesn't equal C, then it's impossible. But what if that's not true? So this is a way to master mental focus. First of all, we are in a disease of focus right now, right? For
Mm.
myself included, like mental focus, mind mastery, and manifestation. And so, you can use this to manifest things that you want in your life or simply to manifest inner peace and like really shift your ability to consciously influence outcomes, influence others, but in consciously influence others, consciously influence the outcomes that you desire in your life. So that's
I
the
think the reason why I wanted you to end on this is because I really think this should be a focus for people to start from. I mean, this can be a
Mm,
key into growing into that space in your life. How do people get in touch with you?
mm. Yeah, and you know what? I have this. I don't know if we have it active right now. I have this. Oh yeah, I have a meditation, like a primer meditation, because part of this quantum visualization process is like activating this capacity to close your eyes and tap in and feel. And there's a whole other dimension in there when your eyes are closed,
Mm.
like you are able to navigate the labyrinth of someplace else, right? When you close your eyes. And so a lot of this program to deprogram includes lots of guided visualizations, and I can offer a free one for people. It's a primer. It's like a beautiful journey. And I could share the link with you if you want to post it. But so StephanieTrager.com. And
StefaniTrager.com. That's easy.
StefaniTrager.com.
We will post that. We will post that so people can reach you. Thank you, Stefanie Trager, for speaking on Compassiviste Dialogues, and thank you for the inspiring presence and the education. I really feel your momentum is every capable human's social duty, and I think that's why I really believe in the journey of increase, because that is the opening of the door to that space. And to our audience, please subscribe to the Compassiviste podcast, this channel, so we can bring you more of these conversations. Share this episode specifically with everybody, because this is the way the collective grows into the future. And we'll list all of the links below, StefaniTrager.com. We're here to help change the world together. I'm Ali Horiat, and thank you for being on the show.
Thank you, Ali.